Hey guys, welcome back. I wanted to recap the predictions that I had made heading into the South Carolina primary and just going over and doing just a general discussion on what this means heading forward. So first, I just want to take a look at the numbers. We can see here with 100% of the precincts reporting, Joe Biden absolutely crushed it. He ran away with this one. It was as good of a night as Joe Biden could have reasonably expected, as he nearly wins by almost about 30 percentage points past second place finisher Bernie Sanders, who was the only other candidate that was able to eclipse the 15 percentage point threshold. So it will be Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders who split up the pledged delegates, with Biden getting considerably more than what Sanders will pick up from the state. And once we get the official numbers on how they're splitting up those respective pledged delegates, I will be updating that pledged delegate tracker. Now we can see here Joe Biden, really strong performance, and he was looking good in the polls leading into the South Carolina primary, but he even outperformed what those numbers were indicating. Kind of a replay of what we had back in 2016, where Hillary Clinton, she was ahead of Bernie in the average of the South Carolina polls by around 30 percentage points, but then on election day, she ended up winning by nearly 50 percentage points. So she outperformed the polls. Joe Biden outperformed the polls, whereas Bernie wasn't able to do that in South Carolina. Now, this is a big change from what we have been seeing from Biden throughout this process, because in Iowa and New Hampshire, he underperformed the polls more than anyone else in this race. He did a bit better in Nevada, and now coming through with a very strong performance. Now, South Carolina expected to be one of the strongest states for Joe Biden, and given the types of voters who came out and supported him, it's not a huge surprise to see him run away with this one, just given how things skewed to an older electorate and a more African-American electorate. Really push Joe Biden into a significant victory in a state that he really needed to have success in. Now, we transition over to Super Tuesday, and before doing a bit of more of a discussion on how this could affect that, I wanted to go through those predictions that I had made. So this was by far the best predictions that I had made out of any of the first four contests. And with these first four contests in particular, I've been extending it a bit beyond just the top three. So with South Carolina, I felt like Klobuchar was probably going to finish at the tail end of the top six candidates, with Warren the next in line in position. And then my toughest prediction was between that third and fourth place slot. I ended up slotting in Buttigieg fourth. Given the very weak numbers that Buttigieg has had with African-American voters, I thought that that would be the deciding factor between him and Tom Steyer. Even though Steyer hasn't necessarily done all that well throughout this process and has been an underperformer of what the polls have indicated in a lot of cases for himself, but he put so many resources into the state to have success in South Carolina, so I felt like he was going to edge out Buttigieg. He was able to do that, so filling that one in green. And then Bernie Sanders, of course, coming in second place. Now, many felt like he could even be competitive to as close as single digits. Wasn't even within the realm of possibility in this instance, with Biden absolutely crushing it. But also Bernie Sanders, they're green, as well as Joe Biden. And then that gets us to a situation where cumulatively now I've gotten 2/3 of the predictions right. Now, Super Tuesday is going to be a bit intense. 15 contests to go through, and I'm going to be probably releasing that video on Monday, making my first, second, and third place predictions for each of those Super Tuesday contests. We'll see how that ends up going. A bit more exciting than what we've had thus far with just one contest at a time. I'm looking forward to having these election days where we get a bit more in the way of results and pledged delegates to divvy up among these candidates. But going back and taking a look at the actual vote numbers that we're seeing here, so with this type of strong performance, it's going to be fascinating to see how the dynamic of this race changes heading towards Super Tuesday. Now, what we have in Super Tuesday is Michael Bloomberg finally starting to become a factor. He wasn't a factor in the first four states. He was planning on kind of getting things going on Super Tuesday, where he's pumped in a ton of money in ads to try to build up something in the way of support. And really, he's almost directly taking from somebody like a Joe Biden, going after more of that older, moderate type of Democratic primary base. And with Joe Biden not spending even close to anything as what Bloomberg has done in these areas, or campaigning around on Super Tuesday states, and not really having a campaign that's been much of a factor in a lot of these areas, it's just going to be interesting. I'm kind of skeptical right now on Joe Biden in some of these areas on Super Tuesday. And what we actually could end up getting here is with Bloomberg siphoning off that centrist moderate type of Democratic primary vote, it could actually open up the door for Bernie Sanders to go on and win some states that he might not have otherwise been able to do if Bloomberg wasn't in the race. So it's almost likely to be a direct positive benefit for somebody like a Sanders that Bloomberg is in the race siphoning off votes from what is becoming his top contender, Joe Biden. Now, we also might see some more strategic voting where individuals that thought they might be wanting to support Michael Bloomberg after the weak performances we saw from Joe Biden early on, perhaps they come back into the Biden camp and allow him to have a bit more success on Super Tuesday as a result of this really strong South Carolina finish. And we also have Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar continuing to stay in this race despite really weak performances from them here. You have Warren at around 7%, Klobuchar only a little bit above 3%, and really the surprisingly strong performance she had in New Hampshire just wasn't able to carry over into the more diverse states of Nevada and South Carolina. But the reason Warren and Klobuchar are sticking in this is because on Super Tuesday, Minnesota and Massachusetts are both holding their primaries, and Democratic establishment wants to do what they can to limit how many pledged delegates that Sanders ends up with on Super Tuesday, which is likely to be a very strong result there, especially for Sanders out in states like California, possibly Texas, and some other areas. But if he's coming up maybe a little bit short or splitting more of those pledged delegates with Warren and Klobuchar, then that's kind of the strategy that's at play here, where Bernie Sanders is the front runner, and it's just pretty much up to the rest of the candidates to try to get as many of those pledged delegates as possible to prevent Sanders from reaching 1,991 by the time they get to the convention. Now, it could be an absolute disaster if Sanders has the clear plurality and he doesn't end up winning the nomination. I think the Democratic Party is just kind of signing their own death warrant in that instance, where I feel like if they overturn the will of the voters, then when we get to the general election against Donald Trump, I just don't think that there's going to be enough of an enthusiasm among that progressive base to show up for the Democratic Party, not just in this election, but perhaps in a number of cycles going forward, again, if they overthrow the will of what the voters would have in that instance. But we still don't even know if that's going to be the case, especially things can change when you get a result like this where Joe Biden just absolutely runs away with it in the final early state result. We've been getting a ton of polls out over this past week that in a number of instances have been very strong for Bernie Sanders. We're not going to likely get much in the way of new relevant data before heading into Super Tuesday to see what kind of an effect this result is going to have. But it also is worth noting that a number of those Super Tuesday states have early voting, so they've already cast that ballot, which won't take into account necessarily this particular Joe Biden result, which could hurt him in some of those areas. But going back to the predictions here, actually Tom Steyer, his third place finish, maybe not exactly what he wanted given all of the resources he pumped into the state, but he steps out of the race. I feel like if his voters are going to go anywhere, probably more so to Joe Biden or Michael Bloomberg than they would be to go to the more progressive candidates like a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren. So tomorrow, once we have an idea exactly how the pledged delegates are going to be split up from the South Carolina contest, I'll make another video going through and dealing out those numbers. We can see South Carolina right up here. They have 54 pledged delegates, and it's just going to be split up between Biden and Sanders, with Biden getting the significant majority. So that's going to wrap this one up, guys. I appreciate you stopping by. There's going to be a ton of upcoming content as we head into Super Tuesday, so please click that subscribe button if you have not already done so, and I hope to see you guys back here for my next video.